Hello, I'm Julie. Welcome to the Druids Down Under Discuss Everything talk for tonight. Dude, tonight I'm going to talk about the sacredness of water and rivers. But before I do, I'll just welcome you in, see who's going to turn up to watch it live. We do these live on Tuesdays at 8:30 Sydney time. If you manage to catch it, that's really cool. I see somebody is watching. Hello. You've got me for the next couple of weeks because I haven't had a chance to organise other people to come along. But after that, I've got lots of people looking at doing talks for a few weeks. And of course, if you're interested in sharing something, do get in touch because I love having lots of people share things in the group. It's really cool. Hi, Carmel. So last week I did a talk on source materials and the mythology, and I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed doing the research for it and finding interesting things to share. And this week I've really enjoyed having a look at, hi Jan, at water and different symbols of water and ways that it turns up in the mythology. It's a pretty huge subject, and I probably won't be able to even scratch the surface of all of the different references that there are about it, but the ones that I've been looking at were really interesting. I kind of became interested in this because of going on that rivers tour out to the Murray-Darling and seeing where these towns have no water, and it got me thinking about the symbolism of rivers and what that's like in our tradition, because I think although it's really important to acknowledge and learn about and respect local Aboriginal cultures and the Aboriginal cultures of whatever place that we're in, it's also really good to do our Druidry work and understand how concepts of the land are expressed in our own tradition, so that we can have those multiple layers of understanding of the symbolisms of the world around us. So I started looking at all these different stories, and I guess I've been looking at them for a while, and there's quite a few different ones I'd like to talk about. But I'm going to look at not just water itself, but also bodies of water like the ocean and lakes and rivers, and holding vessels like cauldrons and grails, which all have a shared symbolism in being about wisdom and inspiration, often rebirth and life-giving forces, or the senses and poetic skill and inspiration too. So they often have a lot of crossover, and it's really interesting to look at these. So let's start with rivers and the sources of rivers and wells and springs. And there's a lot of stories that have these common elements, to the point where you're listening to a story and you might be hearing the story for the first time, but there'll be sort of familiar elements that come up again and again, and they'll come up in different combinations, so that you almost feel like, oh, have I heard this story before? But then it might be a completely different story about a different place and about a different person. But there's often these similar concepts that come up again and again in the stories. And some of those are the presence of hazel trees or hazel bushes, salmon in the water, the pool being fed by multiple streams that are symbolic of different things, the pool being about wisdom itself and the source of wisdom, and people journeying to that place to find wisdom of some kind, and also often there's a walking around the well, and these things might actually be present in a number of different places physically as well, and so those places might get associated with those stories, and you can sort of see how a familiar story might get put onto different places and find different forms in different parts of the world where people were writing these stories and sharing them. So one of them is the story of the Well of Sagesh, which is also called Nectan's Well, and it's the source of the River Boyne in Ireland, and it's named after Boan, who went there looking for wisdom and unadvisedly walked around the well 3 times widdershins, so anti-clockwise, and caused it to rise up, and it harmed her and drowned her, and she turned into the spirit of the river, and it became named after her. And there's a similar story about the river Shannon, where the goddess Shannon goes to the source of that river and is also drowned and becomes the river spirit too. So there's a similarity in the stories there as well. There's also the story of and those ones are also related to hazels and salmon and things like that too. And then there's also the story of Cormac and the fountain, where Manannán Maclear explains the symbolism of the different streams and it being about wisdom. And the salmon that's caught by is caught by Finnegas in the story of Finn McCool, but Finn takes the immas, like Arwen, the inspiration on his thumb when he's cooking it. So there's these sort of crossovers and similarities, and they all relate often in the stories to the source of wisdom and the source of nourishment in like spiritual nourishment, but also the poetic wisdom as well. And sometimes this idea of a stream of knowledge or a stream of science comes into the poetry that we see as well, and may relate to, there's certain puns that are often used here and there, and may relate to certain forms of poetry that had to be learned, or different streams of the science of the poet. And so they go to the place that it's a symbolic meaning of going to a place of learning to get the different ways of knowing and expressing the poetry explained through the metaphor of the well and the water. So yes, to move along, so I'm going to run out of time. We've got quite a lot to look at with this rather large subject in just 20 minutes. So vessels, cauldrons and chalices. So there's quite a few different cauldrons that do different things in the different stories. A lot of us would be familiar with Ceridwen's cauldron in the story of Taliesin, that gives Guillaume Bach the Arwen when he burns his finger. Again, a similar story to Finn McCool. On the Arwen as it becomes brewed, and then he has his journey travelling through the land in chase with the goddess, and it eventually gets reborn and travels on a stream, and then is out in the ocean, and then is found at a salmon weir. So there's that symbolism again in his story of the water, the related symbols. There's also the Dagda's cauldron, and it's said that no company ever went away from it unsatisfied. So it had a never-ending supply of food. It was always providing nourishment. So magical nourishment in a way. So the cauldron that's a different cauldron that's in the second branch of the Mabinogion, and sometimes called the cauldron of Bran, it's like a cauldron of rebirth, where the warriors are put in the cauldron after they've died in battle, and then they're reborn, but without the ability to speak, which is quite interesting when you think about the relationship with poetry, and how that one seems to be at odds with that in some ways. So it's quite interesting, but there is this sort of nourishment, rebirth, refreshing energy still there in the story. There's also the symbol of the Holy Grail, I suppose, which some people have considered to be similar to this idea of the cauldron. That's another symbol of wisdom, divine inspiration, and healing and long life and things like that as well. So there's those symbols. The ocean, often related to Manannán Maclear, who's considered like an otherworldly guide into the other worlds, into the the fairy realms over the ocean. Often they would talk about going past the ninth wave as like leaving the world, leaving Ireland or wherever they were, would be like going to leave the world is to go out onto the ocean past the ninth wave. There's also all these associations with the ocean representing journeying and other worlds. Often there are quite a few stories about journeying out into the sea or out to islands and things like that. The voyage of Muldoon, I might be pronouncing that wrong, and the voyage of Bran, which are quite similar stories, are about a group of people travelling to lots of different bizarre islands where they experience weird symbolic things that are, baffling like experiences that people that through those experiences they come eventually to an understanding. So that particular story, the one about Muldoon anyway, is about forgiveness and overcoming the desire for revenge, which is, it's kind of like a meditation or a dream journey or something like that, where the ocean itself and the journey over the ocean is kind of like the meditative experience. So the water there is like being, it has that otherworldly quality, but that otherworldly quality like a meditation and like a journey or a trance or something where we're going into different parts of the consciousness, I think. So, and often all kinds of different waterways are considered entrances into the other world. Like lakes are often considered the same way. The story of Lake Llanfach in Wales, where they have the setting for the Physicians of Mythfi story, is about where a beautiful girl comes out of the lake, and she's from the other world, and she has wisdom to share in the end of the story about herbs and medicine. So it's almost like, quite literally, when you look at a reflective lake, you can see the reflection of the world underneath, and it's almost as though people are imagining that is a real world that you could go to, that imaginative quality of being able to go into some other world in water is, part of that symbolism. And there's also the Lady of the Lake in the stories of Arthur. So yes, those are the main ones that I'd come across. There's also some mentions of Arwen being related specifically to the water's flow in some of the poetry. A familiar little part from the Hostile Confederacy. The Arwen I sing, from the deep I bring it. A river while it flows, I know its extent. I know when it disappears. I know when it fills. I know when it overflows. I know when it shrinks. I know the base there is beneath the sea. So not only is he comparing, and this is in the book of Taliesin, supposedly this is a poem by Taliesin, he's explaining that not only is Arwen like water and flows, but also it gives him the ability to know the nature of water and to know the world beneath the sea, to go there. So there's that dual meaning in that little paragraph. So Arwen isn't only related to water. There's also often Arwen is related to wind. The word Arwen means like inspiration. The spire part of inspiration is similar to Arwen. It means sacred breath or sacred wind, sacred air. So that gets related to Arwen as well, and also fire, like the fire in the head. So there's sort of that almost land, sea and sky connection there with the different ways that Arwen gets understood. So yeah, those are all my little examples that I wanted to share with you. And so we can see how there's a lot of different examples of how water is related to wisdom and inspiration and poetry and rebirth in that kind of refreshing, coming into being, life-giving energy. That of course water must have. It is a life-giving, like literally life-giving element. So how do we apply this to our own lives? How do we relate this back to looking at our own rivers and bodies of water around us and help use this as this knowledge as a way to connect with our land and with Australia, or wherever you are, if you're somewhere else. So it's worth considering what bodies of water are near where you live. Are there lakes, oceans, creeks, rivers, springs, or wells? And maybe mapping them out. It's worth finding out if there are any Aboriginal stories that you are able to find out about those creeks and rivers. A lot of the ones near where I live do have stories that we can find out about, and that's been really interesting for me to explore some of that. You might find that there's a local information centre, or perhaps somebody's written a book about your local area that you can find out about what those waterways are about, because going there and seeing it for yourself, it can be a lovely practice to do. I found that sometimes the Celtic stories do sort of present themselves in these places as well. And although it's good to be sensitive to what stories have already been told about a place, it's also perfectly okay to come with our tradition of our wisdom that is with us, and to understand the elements of the world around us in those traditions as well. Just, it's not about competing. There's just lots of different levels of meaning in the world around us. I found that some places that I go to really have a strong, I find there's a strong sense of the Aboriginal mythology there and stories, whereas other places seem very welcoming to new ideas and like the idea of being associated with a Bridget's Well or an offering to Manannan or something like that. So just taking some time to feel in and also learn about the area and its history is a really good thing to do. Take some time and discover these places for yourself. You might like to take an offering. Of course, the throwing a wishing, like a penny in a well, is perhaps a continuation of an old Celtic tradition of giving offerings at these sacred places. And though maybe leaving a coin isn't necessarily the most environmentally friendly thing to do, you might like to just maybe place a leaf with an intention on it to go down a river, or cast a stone out into the sea. These can be really lovely things to do if you take some time with them before you send them out. But that action of sending it out into the waters, into the the primal waters of the other world, sending messages between the worlds, can feel like a really lovely thing to do. So I've just got a couple of minutes left. I just want to tell you a couple of things that I've done that have been really nice, or things that I think would be fun to do if you'd like to add some different things to your practice. Perhaps you could find a spring nearby and take some flowers there to leave for Bridget on the sunrise at Imbolc. That might be a lovely thing to do. I've found a little cave with a spring in it that I like to associate with Bridget and that Imbolc sunrise time. Making a mandala on the beach can be a really nice thing to do, with stones and swirls and playing with the sand. That's always a lovely thing to do. Perhaps as an offering to Manannan or to another ocean deity, if you feel it. You could make a cauldron of mead to share with friends, or perhaps spiced wine, or if you don't drink, maybe just some really lovely, clear, fresh spring water, and maybe tell a story of one of those beautiful myths of the cauldron and its meaning before sharing it around with your friends. At summertime, you might like to take a ritual swim in an ocean or a river and meditate on taking a journey into the other world for seeking wisdom. Or you might like to take a pilgrimage walk to the source of a river near you and spend some time there pondering the nature of the sources of wisdom and water, and explore that place with your senses, and perhaps even write some poetry, see what comes to you. So I hope you enjoyed having a listen to that. I hope it inspires you to go and check out some of the watery places near you, or to explore some of that symbolism, and to learn more about the land where you live and your connection with those beautiful sacred places. So thanks for listening. I'll catch you again.